I will be talking about animal welfare and animal rights. Short answer is no, not the same idea, but it's more complicated than that. So a bit of history. If we go back to the ancient times, then there are few philosophers in ancient Greek who regarded animals as having souls, as animals should not be eaten. But that was that. Next bit of history, when we get to the animals again, is 17th century with Rene Descartes. I'm not sure how much of you are familiar with his philosophy. He's quite famous philosopher, but not very good on animals. So he was proponent of vivisection. He claimed that animals are just machines, not capable of feelings like humans. So it was a difficult time in that sense. But also in the 17th century, we are talking of the first animal protection legislation. And here we are talking mainly about cattle, about sheep, horses, cows, and protection of animals, not from their owner, but from other people. So they were protected as property. Basically, people did not see the reason why the owner itself should harm his animals, because farm animals, cattle, were providing for their owner. In 18th century, we get a big shift in Jeremy Bentham from the way Descartes thought. So Jeremy Bentham has famously said, the question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? So the shift is from basing our understanding of animals from what is different in them from us to what is similar in them with us. But I must mention that this is a footnote in Jeremy Bentham's work. It's just a small remark in his work that he's done to argument for ending slavery. In the 19th century, we're already talking about the first animal protection organization, further legislations. End of 19th century, we also have the first mention of animal rights. But this work of Henry Salt didn't have much respondents during that time. It's the end of the 20th century when this work was noticed. The shift, a big major shift that is influencing us now is 1920s when the industrial farming began. When at first animal welfare, how animals are doing, was connected with the production. So if the animal didn't do well, the owner didn't get enough fleece of the wool, enough meat of the cow, enough milk. So it wasn't good for them to harm knowingly or unknowingly animals. With the industrial farming, things change. And the major change is not in the 20s, but after World War II, when more and more food is needed. We have new medicine to keep diseases under control, including diseases in animals. So we have antibiotics to keep under control the diseases that might be present in industrial farming, because there are a lot of animals cramped in a small, closed space. So in the 60s, environmental ethics emerges as a separate discipline. Later in the 70s, as a sub-discipline, we can talk about animal ethics. 64, Ruth Harrison, Animal Machines, the book that shook the ordinary people, book that showed what really goes on in the industrial farming, because people still believe that the meat, the milk, it comes from the animals grazing on the pastures. It was the romantic picture that was helped by the manufacturers. It was in their interest that people believe that things are like this. So in 64, after publishing of Animal Machines, we get Bramble Committee to investigate animal welfare. And the 5 freedoms are set. So 5 freedoms are the way to constitute animal welfare. Animal has to be free from hunger or thirst, from discomfort, from pain, injury, or disease. It has to be able to express most normal behavior, and it has to be free from fear and distress. Those markers are still used today. In 74, Animal Rights International were established. In 75, Animal Liberation, book by Peter Singer, that gave the push to animal rights movements, to animal welfare movements. In the 84, Tom Reagan with the Case for Animal Rights, another proponent book in this field. So all this led to what we know today, the major legislations, the way we think about the animals, and not only the farm animals. Everything started with the farm animals. But today we are talking about animal welfare in context of dogs, in context of research animals. But everything started with food industry. So what is animal welfare? We have animal welfare science as the way to assess welfare. And this was established after 64, after Bramble Committee, because now we had to deal with the animal welfare. We also have animal welfare as a strand in philosophy, which deals with the values, the norms in this concept. Animal welfare as the broad term, when we use it, is normative. We have in it component of how we should treat animals. As the narrow term, the way it's used in animal welfare science, It describes the state of the animal. So one way to say what is animal welfare is to describe the good state of animal. So an animal is in a good state of welfare as indicated by scientific evidence. This scientific is important. Is healthy, comfortable, well-nourished, safe, able to express innate behavior, and is not suffering from unpleasant states such as pain, fear, and distress. However, welfare is always value-laden term because it has to be good for animal. When we're talking about animal, it's what is healthy for it, what is comfortable for it. We are talking about its pain, fear, and distress. So to talk about animal welfare, to take into account animal welfare, we have to have knowledge. We have to know what is good for animal. But it's also value-laden in the other way. It's what is acceptable for the culture in which animal is situated. So our culture has changed significantly in the past 100 years. And what is acceptable by society right now is not what it was acceptable 100 years ago. So the focus when we are using animal welfare language is on how animals are treated and on how animals should be treated. What does it mean? It means bettering conditions whenever it's possible. But narrow term of animal welfare is very rarely used to evaluate actual state of a concrete animal. We are more using this term to better conditions of animals. We're also talking about avoidance of pain and suffering whenever possible. So if we use animal welfare language, we can talk about banning of docking, cropping, because this is avoidance of pain and unnecessary suffering. So the outlook of animals having as good life as possible in contact zone with humans. The contact zone is the zone where humans and animals interact, when their lives are intervened, when they meet. To do this, to have this outlook, what kind of life is good for an animal? What kind of life is good for a dog? We need to have specific knowledge of this species, specific knowledge of this breed. So when we use animal welfare language, when we are talking about the welfare of animals who are used for food production, we are talking about minimizing suffering, about bettering the conditions animals are kept in, bettering the practices. For that, the knowledge is needed. Animals as pests, those are also in the contact zone. And we are talking about minimizing the suffering. We need to know pests, not pets. As companions, also minimizing suffering, bettering conditioning, having more knowledge of the dogs, what is good for them, for cats, for rats, for any animal. So let's turn to the animal rights. It's usually understood as animal rights movement, sometimes thought to be animal welfare activism, animal rights activism, but it also is a certain strain in philosophy. We are talking about moral rights, more of the moral rights than the legal rights. And according to this way of thinking, at least some of the non-human animals, not some say all of non-human animals, are entitled to have their own lives. So they have to have a kind of possession of their own lives, have the right to decide for their own. And their most basic interests should be taken into consideration as equal to the similar interests of humans. There are also strands in the law, animal law, which is concentrating on extension of the basic legal rights and personhood to at least some of the animal. Some countries have taken the step to announce big apes as persons and having the rights. Also, some of the whales and dolphins. So how does it work? This is a parallel concept to the human rights. It is extending the familiar concept. So as human rights were at first white male privilege, then the women's rights, then the other races, then the other minorities. The same way this concept is tried to be stretched over animals. So in this field, Peter Singer and Animal Liberation is important book, although Peter Singer himself uses animal rights language. He's not quite animals rights activist. Tom Reagan in '84 said that non-human animals are subject to life. And therefore, because they are subject to life, they possess the moral rights. So they must be able to decide for themselves. We must take them into account. The focus of